On this episode, we chat with linguist and host of the You Too Can Learn Thai podcast, Kru Nan.
So if you want a fun and different angle on learning Thai, you'll love this episode of the Bangkok podcast.
Sawadee krap, and welcome to the Bangkok podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who came to Thailand in 2001 to find the true meaning of Kreng Chai. I found it last year, actually, but I don't want to inconvenience anyone by revealing what it is, so I'll just keep it to myself.
Oh, you're so clever. A little inside Thai language humor there.
Zing!
And I'm Ed Knuth, an American who came to Thailand on a one-year teaching contract 20 years ago. Fell in love with endless protests that make me feel like I'm part of some exciting drama, but don't actually affect my life very much. So I never left.
This is a great story to tell your friends back home. How are things going over there? Oh, yeah, I got to dodge burning cars and stuff.
we get to feel like we're part of some drama, but actually we're pretty safe.
That's right. The biggest posers ever.
We want to say a quick thank you to one of our patrons, Peter Kostovchik, who supports us at the show shoutout level. Stick around after our interview with Kru Nan from You Too Can Learn Thai podcast to learn why Peter needs to start a hidden camera comedy series with one of our other recent patron shoutouts. We also want to say a big thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a whole bunch of cool stuff, including our ad-free regular show a day early, behind-the-scenes photos and videos of our interviews, discounts on swag, access to our Discord server, and various other things that aren't available to regular listeners. But best of all, patrons like Peter also get an unscripted, uncensored bonus episode every week where we riff on current events and random topics. We just finished recording this week's bonus show, and we chatted about the ongoing protests and why it doesn't seem to resonate like previous ones did. A final happy update on Greg's Venus flytrap saga.
Yeah.
And some additional thoughts on the expat stereotypes that we discussed on last week's show. To become a patron, head to bangkokpodcast.com/support.
I know everyone's waiting for
your Venus flytrap update.
Yeah. Gonna start a Substack newsletter, see what I can get. All right, well, on this episode, we are finally doing an interview that's been over 2 years in the making, believe it or not, and we are welcoming Kru Nan from the You Too Can Learn Thai podcast. Nan got her PhD in linguistics in the UK, where she studied language acquisition and education. She's a university professor, and in her free time, makes a podcast called You Too Can Learn Thai, helping learners of Thai practice listening while learning new words and expressions along the way. Definitely something, Ed, that I think you and I should take advantage of on a regular basis.
No way, dude. We don't need it. Our Thai is perfect.
We got to add another category to last week's show of stereotypes.
Yeah, you're right. The person who lacks self-awareness about how bad their Thai is.
the linguistic plateauer. I'm fine. I'm good.
It's funny. Very funny.
Actually, this episode was suggested by one of our listeners named Neil, who wrote a letter. Yeah, it was 2 years ago, but Nan was busy, and then I was busy, and then she was busy, and then all this stuff. So we finally connected a while ago and had a conversation that was very enlightening. So here is my conversation with Kru Nan. Well, hello, Nan. Thank you for coming on the Bangkok podcast, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you're joining us from America,
Mm-hmm.
so you're up in the morning, and I'm talking in the evening.
Yeah.
And this meeting has been a long time coming. We've had a couple of our listeners suggest reaching out to you and getting you on the show, so I'm glad it's finally happened. And I just looked back, and the first email that I sent you was sent on June 12th, 2019.
Yeah,
So
like 2 year anniversary has passed.
yeah. So, I mean, your schedule, you're very busy, and my schedule, I'm busy over here, and then getting our time zones to match up. It took a long time. So welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to have this opportunity.
So how long have you been doing your podcast then? You're the host of You Too Can Learn Thai. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so I started making the podcast, I think at the end of 2018, and that's when I finished my teaching in the UK. So I thought, well, I still wanted to continue teaching the students, and internet seems to be a good way to connect. So
Yeah.
I started a podcast.
Do you do it every week or every 2 weeks? Or?
Yeah. Well, at the beginning it's every week, and then work started to catch up. So it has been every 2 weeks, and then I have some hiatus. Just like I think Bangkok podcast also has some hiatus as well, right? So
I wish we had more.
So yeah, I had some break, and now it's almost 50 episodes.
Well, I thought it was interesting to discuss with you some specific things about the Thai language.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you and I had some early discussions way back about me coming on your podcast and speaking Thai. But embarrassingly, I had to finally admit it to myself that my Thai was just too crappy to come on and speak confidently about anything, which is a shame.
No. You said like there are some topics that you are like gymnastic, super great at talking about.
My buddy calls them balance beam Thai, because within 2 inches on either side, you're like front flips, back flips, whatever. But then like 1 inch to the side in your open space, and you're free falling and cartwheeling backwards. That's me. So one of the things that you and I were talking about in our leading up to this, we were discussing how people learn languages, like how our brains learn languages.
Mm-hmm.
And something you said that I found quite interesting was how babies learn languages. And we always talk about how kids can just, their brains are sponges. They just suck up everything. And that's called the critical period, where babies can't do much of anything because babies are kind of useless. So they just sit there and listen, and that's all they do. But adults can't really do that. So how do adults compensate for that? Can adults compensate for that?
First of all, for the critical period, there is a hypothesis for that in terms of like the theoretical research, but we don't have a very firm conclusion yet, because most of the data is like observational. We can't assign children to different groups and let them start speaking language at different time. So basically what we notice is that the baby, they do pretty well, and they can be native if you start early on. And if you delay your start of learning a language until probably somehow like puberty, then it's very difficult for you to reach the native level. But having said that, there are some things that adults seem to do pretty good, like probably not as native as children can do, but adults can be quite good at learning language as well. The first one, though, is the speed of acquisition or speed of learning. Like if you just said that children like need a year or two just to listen and absorb the language. But for adults, you can just go to a class for 1 hour and you can start speaking right away. So this is kind of like the cognitive difference between children and adults, right? So I would say adults have kind of like a head start in terms of learning. So you can absorb thing or learn thing pretty fast when input is limited. And the advantages of children is they accumulate a lot. And at some point, there is like an explosion, exponential rise in their capabilities.
I guess adults are able to contextualize language. You know, like babies might learn the word mamuang and manam, but they wouldn't know the difference between those two things. But even though adults might take, some time to learn those two things, mango and river, then they would be able to contextualize them together. Oh, mamuang belongs in the ponomai category, and manam belongs in the category with boats and bridges and things like that. So they have a bit more of an ability to connect those words with other words, which babies don't have.
Yeah, I agree. It's like because adults have more developed mind in some parts. It's just like, some theories say that adults are better in terms of pragmatics as well. So pragmatics is like the interaction, how language is connected to interaction between the speaker and the listener. Just like if you try to explain why, for example, English speaking people, when you can't hear something clearly, then you probably say like, I'm sorry or pardon me, which sound quite polite, but for Thai people in Thai, we usually say "arai na," which is translated as "what." So for English speaking people to hear Thai people saying like "what," it will sound a little not so polite. And if you explain that,
That's really funny because my son says the same thing. My son is 6.5, and when he there's certain things that in Thai that he's better at. I think he's stronger in English, but like if he doesn't hear you, instead of saying pardon or what, he'll go what, and I have to tell him like, I mean in Thai, arai makes sense, but the direct translation of what sounds a bit harsh in English.
Yeah, I know, right? So yeah, that's one of the things. Like this kind of deep understanding between about relationship between people may be a little difficult for children to understand.
Yeah. Now, have you heard of the AUA, the American University Alumni Association? They had an English course a Thai course in Thailand for years and years and years. And a good friend of mine actually used to manage it. And I was never really on board with their process. And the process, as I understand it, was that you would show up to their class and you would just sit there and listen for however many weeks it was before you were allowed to talk. And this always struck me as really suspect. That definitely would not work for me.
So you start to learn like a child.
Yeah, exactly.
Listen
exactly.
A lot.
But you're not a child, you're an adult. And I think you have the capability, like you said, to take those new words and start using them in different contexts.
Yeah, definitely. Also for adults, you have the help of your native language as well. Like you just talked about mango. So for kids in order to learn about mango, they probably need to smell it, eat it, touch it. But for adult, I tell you, mamuang is mango. You don't need to go through all those kinds of activities. Right. You know what it is.
Right. So we can automatically assign a color and a shape and a taste to it.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas kids just poop their pants and start crying.
They need time.
Yeah. So you are a Thai teacher too.
Yes.
And you teach advanced Thai? Is that mostly advanced Thai?
Well, mostly it's beginners, but recently I have been teaching advanced and I find it very interesting.
How come?
Well, because first of all, there aren't many materials or impressions of how people teach advanced students because most people start as a beginner, and when you reach intermediate or upper beginner level, many people give up. So there aren't many materials you can find for advanced teaching. And also, secondly, because I think there are some strategies for advanced students that are different from beginners. Like if for me, I would consider myself speaking English as probably like upper intermediate or near advanced. And I notice myself as well, like when I speak English, there are ways that I can get around. Like I can keep the communication going, but actually I'm not saying what I really want to say. Like I can't find the words that I want to say, something like that. And I think one of the point of advanced teaching is to get to those problems. Like sometimes they can get around, but I want to teach them like extra words, the words that can help them achieve like what they really want. So it's kind of different from beginner teaching, I think.
Yes, I feel the same way with Thai, because oftentimes I will say like, okay, I want to say this in Thai, da, 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 da. And I figure it out in my head. Okay, you say this and this and this. I'm pretty sure that's right. And then I'll hear a Thai person say the exact same sentence, the same meaning, but use completely different words. And it's really frustrating. It's like, because you're like, oh God, like I wanted to say it and I think I was going to be successful, but there's so many different ways to say the same thing.
Yeah. So one of the things for the advanced, in addition to being able to touch on different topics, is that you can find like the exact thing, or being like speaking in a culturally appropriate way. Yeah, I think.
Right. Like when I say alaiwa, I copy my Thai friends and they say, you can't say that. You said that.
There
And I
are
said,
different standards between
yeah,
foreigners.
apparently. So when you teach this, for instance, say if you were teaching a beginner's class and then, your beginner's class finished at 1 p.m. and then at 1 p.m. you had an advanced learners class, how would you need to adjust the way you think about what you're about to teach and your lessons? Would it really be different in how you approached your teaching style?
Well, first of all, the teaching style main difference is that for advanced students, I use Thai to teach Thai. So all the explanation, everything, all interactions in the class is in Thai. So that's kind of mind shift a little bit. Like it's a shift a little bit. So I'm in a Thai context now, and it's good for them as well to listen to Thai every time, like all the time during the class. And yeah, because we do some lesson planning. So I'll need to go through like everything one more time in order to like familiarize with the difficulty or the text that I'm going to teach. So yes, we need to do some shift.
Yeah. What are your lessons like for advanced learners? Like what do you teach them? Do you teach them reading out of a book, or do you teach them role playing or things like that?
Yeah, so I try to include a combination of different things, but my number one rule for picking what to teach for the advanced students is that the material needs to be authentic. So it has to be something created by Thai people for Thai people, not created by Thai people for foreigners. It's kind of different, right? For beginners, textbooks, of course, they are created for learners, and there are like explanations, and it's like a long way of picking, sifting through the grammar points and vocabulary, etc. But for advanced students, I use like sometimes it's an article online, but for articles online, for online stuff, sometimes we need to do some editing for like typos and or punctuation, those kind of stuff. But I try to keep them minimal. And we also do podcasts. There are quite a few Thai podcasts that are very good. So I let them listen to the podcast, and then we do the discussion or extended practice during the classroom. So their work is not light. So they need to read if it's like a text, then they need to read beforehand. If it's a podcast or videos, then they need to watch or listen beforehand, and then we do extended practice during the classroom.
Right. And you mentioned that you like to use a lot of like comedy material, pop culture material as well. Why is that?
Well, first of all, I think pop culture and comedy is interesting. It's like it doesn't feel like learning for students somehow, because we probably noticed that out of the classroom, actually the students, they watch Thai movies by themselves, even though it's not required. They watch Thai series. So when it's entertainment, it doesn't feel like learning. It's just like when at work, you would say, do what you love and you will never work a day in your life.
Yeah.
Just something like that. So I try to find something that they enjoy. That's one of the reasons. And another reason is that there are so many linguistic and cultural references in pop culture and comedy materials.
That's right. That's right. We'll get into that in more detail in a second, but I totally get what you're saying, because like, a lot of these Thai textbooks are pretty dry, Somchai goes to the market and he buys some fruit or whatever, but I would much rather, like Greg, explain the plot of the Simpsons episode in Thai. Like that for me would be a really interesting challenge. And I would respond very well to that, I think. But it's this sort of dry material that's been around for 100 years that is really kind of a slog to get through.
Yeah, indeed. I guess book is good in terms of it's there. You can write it once and it's always there. Yeah. But for this kind of like, for example, the comedy and stuff, one is that the cultural and linguistic reference, sometimes they change as well. So it's related to time, and it probably require more preparation from the teacher side. So I guess that's probably one of the reasons why it's not that prevalent.
That's right. And I think not a lot of Thai teachers would have time or the inclination to go and sit down and watch a bunch of Simpsons episodes so they could understand what, the student is talking about.
Indeed.
Let's talk more about pop culture, because when we were discussing your coming on the show, we had a really interesting conversation about the nuances of a culture and how they react to and how they relate to pop culture. And Ed, my co-host, and I have said on the show many times before that if you really want to understand a language, you need to understand the culture, and especially the pop culture of that country, of the language you're trying to learn. It just there's so much shorthand and slang and jokes and references that get thrown around, just like in English, that are really hard to get if you don't understand the culture of Thailand, because we're talking about learning Thai. Yep. And you mentioned a really interesting story about a snake. I thought it was fascinating. Let's get into that.
Yeah, definitely. So this is one of the skit from a comedy show that I found, and I used it in the advanced lesson as well. So basically in the story there is a man and a woman, and the man was trying to go after the woman. So in Thai, well, when I told this story to you, you said that it's a little creepy to mention that you dreamt of her. But in Thai, it seems like okay to say that you dream of a woman to mean that you miss her or to think of her.
Right. So in the story, this guy had a dream about the woman.
Yeah.
And he told her, right?
He told her. Yeah. He told her that he dreamt about her. And what's interesting is that in the dream, so he dreamt of a snake and it slithered in and it wrapped her. It wrapped her up. And then he was kind of like he did a heroic act and he went on and killed the snake.
Right. Okay.
So here there is some references or some cultural background. So first of all, to say that you think of someone by saying that you have dreamt of someone, it sounds quite okay to Thai people. So really? I think that's one of the reference. Yeah. I think it's okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you walked up to a colleague in an American or Western office and said, "Hey, I had a dream about you last night," I mean, alarm bells would be going off. Like, okay,
really?
This is weird. And creepy. Really? Yeah, that's not something you would do.
Interesting. Yeah.
But in Thai, it's like, oh, you're thinking about me. Ooh, that's a bit romantic.
Yeah, indeed. Especially in terms of like the romantic side. And so I guess this is kind of like the first cultural difference. And the second one is about the snake, like slithering in. So, and wrapping her up. So in Thai, we have so many superstitions, as you may notice. But one of one of the very widespread one is that, well, actually, if a woman dreams that she is wrapped by a snake, it means that she will meet a soulmate. It's kind of like one of the very important interpretation of dreams in Thai.
That is not how most Western women would interpret being squeezed by a snake. That would probably, I mean, the guy saying, "Hey, there's a snake wrapping you up, and I busted in and I attacked that snake to save you. I'm the hero." That's the interpretation that the Westerner would have.
Yeah. So the heroic act is one of them as well. But I guess the main one, the more important one, is that you are meeting a soulmate who is me, kind of like that.
Whoa, wow.
Yeah, and the ending is also interesting. So actually in this story, the woman is not much interested in the guy, or maybe she hasn't paid attention to him. She paid attention to something else. So after he killed the snake, she interpreted the whole dream as telling her about the lottery number, because another interpretation, major interpretation of the dreams in Thailand is whether it tells you some numbers so you can buy the lottery, right? So she interprets the slithering of the snake as number 8, because it's kind of like left, right, circling.
The snake is like goes in, and the snake slithers in the number 8.
Yes, it's number 8. And then this one is linguistically related. So he said that the snake eventually died. So die, of course, you can say tai in Thai, right? But in order to make it rhyme or in order to make it a homophone, in the story, he used the word sun, sun, which is like sun xia, kind of lost, gone, sap sun, kind of, is part of the word. So sun can mean gone. And sun, it's a homophone of the number 0, right? Number 0 is also sun. So she said,
Right.
okay, so that means 80. I'll go buy a lottery with the number 80, ending 80.
It's so fascinating. Okay, so just to sum up, so
Mhm.
a dude has a dream about a snake attacking a woman, and he
Mhm.
busts in and kills a snake.
Mhm.
For a foreign audience, they would think that like the woman was being attacked, she was in
Mhm.
danger, and
Mhm.
the man dreamed about being the hero and saving her.
Mhm.
For the Thai person, the woman is meeting her soulmate,
Mhm.
or someone is thinking about her in that way, and she also sees it as a good omen that she should go out and buy a lottery ticket for the number 80. Is that
Yes.
roughly right?
Yes.
I mean, it's so different. There's two completely different interpretations of that.
Yeah, isn't it?
Right. So, I mean, if you were describing that, if
Mhm.
I was describing that dream in Thai, I would
Mhm.
probably use words like, antalai, danger,
Mm.
I came in and I saved you and things like that. But
Mm.
I need to understand that if I was describing this dream to a Thai audience, the tone of how I described it, the words that I used would all need to be different.
Yeah, or the parts that you emphasize, like it's
Yeah.
wrapping you, it's squeezing you.
It's
So that
squeezing you with love rather than attacking you to kill you and eat you.
indeed.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And that's a really good example, right? Like,
Mhm.
this very simple thing can be completely misinterpreted based on just cultural nuance.
Yeah, definitely. And there are like both cultural and linguistics reference as well, like the numbers soon. Hmm. Yeah, so another one is also related to the language and culture. So you know that kids are adorable. You have a kid, and especially baby,
Well,
especially
okay, let's
when
just say they're
he was a
adorable.
baby.
Well, most of the time, yeah.
Most of the time, yeah. So when you see like cute babies in Thailand, what do you say to the baby or to the parents?
Say narak,
Narak, right? And
right?
that's kind of like the standard. Like I would tend to, I would say I would have a gut feeling to say that as well. And if I was in like foreign cultures, I would not be afraid to say like the baby is cute. But actually in Thai culture, it's kind of a little taboo to say to a kid or parents that the kid is cute, because we have some superstition again that if you say that a kid is cute, then a ghost will know that too, and the ghost will take the baby away.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, so that's why so maybe around your kid, it depends, because sometimes people know that you are from a different culture, so they don't do much of the Thai thing. But among Thai people, many people would say that the kid isน่ารักน่าชัง. So น่ารัก, means cute or adorable, but น่าชัง actually means unpleasant. ชัง actually means hate. So it's like I love to hate it. So น่ารักน่าชัง is like adorable but unpleasant. So in this way, the ghost will not notice the kid and will not take the kid away.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. I
Mm-hmm. And
cannot
some people,
imagine
yep.
the face of a parent in Canada if I walked up and said, "Your baby is adorable but unpleasant."
Yeah. And some people like even went a step further and just say like น่าเกลียดน่าชัง, like ugly and unpleasant.
Ugly.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, if you are Thai people, then they will not react too harshly on that, because we know that this is not intended. And sometimes we say that with a smile, but the words that come out of your mouth is ugly.
Wow, that's interesting. I've never heard that before. And I'm trying to think back of what people said to my kid.
Mhm.
Maybe he just wasn't that narak. I don't know. I can't remember. No, he was a pretty cute kid. What about when you walk up to a baby and you go like, "Boom pui"? and you poke them or something.
Oh, I say.
Actually, people come up to me and say that sometimes too. It means chubby.
You mean like you or your kid? You yourself?
Both. Fun. This is a bit of a detour, but I had an ex-girlfriend one time, and she used to call me Toi Noi.
Oh, they know.
Toi Noi, which means like chubby but
Chubby,
fat
cute.
but cute or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And she eventually got used to using it so much that we'd go to a restaurant or something, and she'd be like, Toi Noi, what do you want? And the waiter would be like, stop calling me Toi Noi.
Yeah, I know, right? Because, well, this is another thing. It might not be language related, but this is definitely the culture. In Thai, you can say like, you can talk about the shape of a person, like whether they are a little chubby, etc., or like whether they are a little short. You can use those terms in an affectionate way, like the intention of your girlfriend. I'm sure that she was trying to be affectionate, but sometimes for foreigners, when you say I'm chubby, it sounds a little weird.
Yeah. And that's a big issue that I think, I mean, we're getting off into a different topic here, but that's probably one of the most difficult issues that foreigners have to deal with when they first come here, is just the absolute blunt directness that Thai people have about how you look. And I mean, I'll use me again as an example because it's my show. But when I first started teaching here, I started teaching at a high school around November. And as I was being led around to being introduced to all the teachers in my department, almost all of them said like, "Oh, great, you can play Santa because you're fat." And I'd been in Thailand for like 4 months or something, and I'm like, "Oh, wow." It took me a long time to realize that they meant it as a compliment. Like, you can play this role so well. We're excited about this. This is great to have you here. Whereas in Canada, I would probably get punched in the face if I'd said that.
Indeed, yeah. And sometimes it's just like it's unnoticed among Thai people. We just like say it naturally, not noticing that it might offend somebody.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think, I mean, as foreigners, we are in Thailand, and to expect Thai people to adapt to our culture is ridiculous. So I think it's important that, if we are trying to learn Thai, that we also try to understand the cultural side of the language too, not just the grammatical side of it, because they kind of complement each other.
Indeed.
Well, Nan, what we do with our $5 patrons is we give them a heads up when we have some guests coming on the show. And I have a couple of questions here from our buddy Mike. And as we were just talking about this, he said he wanted me to ask, when you talked about how understanding a culture helps you understand a language, Nan, what are your thoughts on how learning a language helps you understand the culture?
I think definitely there is a relationship to that, because language and culture are like two sides of the same coin. You can't separate them apart.
Right.
And what I can think of now is that there are so many Thai words that are related to jai, like the heart.
Sure.
And yeah, I think it kind of, if you understand the words, the language, then it kind of help you understand a little bit about how Thai people think, the logic of Thai people. For example, I think a very classic one is like Greng Jai.
Greng Jai, of course, yes.
Yeah, it's kind of one of the concepts that is pretty difficult to explain to foreigners, or at least translate to a foreign language. But if you take it apart, the language, and Jai is something related to the heart, and Greng maybe Greng has a meaning of a little like scared or taken back, is kind of the meaning behind Greng. So Greng Jai is like you are being considerate. You think about you think for someone, and you do not want to offend that person. So that's why you kind of like you take yourself back a little bit. So
Right.
I think, yeah, this helps understand like the culture or how we use like Greng Jai.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. And I think also, I mean, I when you learn, like na dam, or, then you have to understand that Thais don't like dark skin, and they attribute a whole sort of negative aura around that. And there's language built up around that as well. So it very much goes back and forth, and they both bounce off of each other.
Indeed.
And another question from Mike. He said, what's your take on the most challenging aspects of learning the Thai language? For me, it would be the tones. And I got to say, Mike, I'm on board, man. I agree. Those tones are killer. And there are days when I am trying to learn something and I am convinced that hundreds of years ago, Thai people got around a campfire and were like, look, we're going to make this impossible for foreigners to learn. And not only that, we're going to make it so that if you say the wrong tone, you're going to sound really talung, like very dirty. And for instance, like I tell Thai people another time, I say, the word glai is very close to the word glai. And a lot of times they're like, oh, yeah, I guess it is. And I'm like, you guess? I mean, it's clear that they're very similar. So I'm sorry, I'm talking too much, but as you teach your students, what are some of the most difficult elements for them to learn?
Well, I say, of course, Mike, I understand your difficulty. And I think for people who come from the background without tones are definitely one of the most difficult ones. But, well, I have to say that some of my students, they come from backgrounds with tones, like Chinese. In Chinese language, they have tones. So actually, it might not be like the universal difficulty among all learners.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I would say another thing though, and I don't mean to say that tones aren't difficult, but giving another example, I think, well, it's actually vocabulary and the intricate or the subtle meanings behind words. It's just like grain dye that we just talked before. There are so many notions or concepts that are difficult to understand. And back to what we did in the main interview, there are so many like cultural references in that that you need to understand in order to understand the word. Also, another thing about vocabulary is that, because if you notice, actually the Thai sentence is not that complex. Like you have subject, verb, object, and you don't really have like the inflection, like the in English SED kind of like that. So actually, you probably don't get that much of a clue from other parts of the language, and that puts more emphasis or more importance to the vocabulary or how you arrange the sentence.
Oh, I see. Okay. So because there's not a lot of subtle nuance in how you can modify the words, you have to choose the words correctly, more carefully.
Yeah, that's my impression.
Interesting. All right. Thanks for sending those in, Mike. Well, Nan, that was super interesting. I know you're busy. I don't want to keep you too long, but thank you so much for coming on the show. And I highly recommend listening to her podcast, listeners. It's great. And certainly hope that it'll help me, especially now, because before the pandemic, I was taking Thai lessons twice a week. And I was making some progress. I was shocked. But now, of course, I'm stuck at home forever and I can't take the Thai lessons anymore. So there's definitely a backslide for me. But now there's great resources online, one of them being your podcast. Where can people find out more about that or more about you?
Yeah, so my podcast is called You Too Can Learn Thai, and it's available almost everywhere. I think everywhere you listen to podcasts, so like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and major platforms, or you can visit youtoocanlearnthai.com to listen to the podcast as well.
Cool.
We also have YouTube and Facebook, which are not updated very frequently, but yeah, we have them.
Okay, nice.
Just search the podcast name.
All right, Nan. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm glad after 2 years we finally got together.
Yeah, I'm glad too. Thank you.
And take care where you are. And we will maybe have you on again sometime soon. We can discuss more weird dreams that mean different things to different
I'm
people.
excited to talk about all the superstitions.
Let's get into ghosts. I love talking about Thai ghosts.
Sure.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Man, it's kind of funny that you and I know so many linguists and Thai teachers. So it's in a way we're compensating. like for our, So instead of learning to speak Thai, we're gonna meet and befriend many experts on Thai language.
Yeah, it's like a real fat person, like myself, say, who becomes best friends with like 5 health experts. And you're like, well,
That's right.
I don't eat very well myself, but I do know a lot of people who know a lot about the subject. So.
It's true, though. But, her take is different. And I thought her emphasis on kind of cultural interpretation was cool because, when you're learning a language, you tend to focus on vocabulary. And I think her point about culture is well taken.
Yeah, I agree too. And I think I like what she said about comedy too, like adding a tinge of comedy into everything. And I'm a huge proponent of that. Like I'm, over the years I've made, training videos and training material and commercials and movies and things like that. And I always say like try to make it at least a little bit funny or entertaining because that connects with people on a much broader level than something that's dry and boring and straightforward. So,
but do you think more so in Thailand than back home? More so here?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, maybe you could throw in a couple of boing sound effects and it would probably stick a bit more. But yeah, I think so. I think Thais, they very famously love to have fun and sanuk. So I think it would probably stick here just as well as anywhere else, maybe even more.
Well, all I can say is all these Thai language experts, they do just make me feel more and more guilty.
Yeah. We have been saying that, though, every Thai language show for the past 3 years. So I'm just wondering how far the depths of guilt can go before.
Hey, in the next 10 years, we can find 10 new experts, and we'll just keep interviewing experts on Thai language. That's all we have to do.
I'll just keep making friends with healthy, fit people. So, but anyway, it's a very great podcast, and many thanks to Nan for coming on the show. We finally found a time to connect, and everyone, if you are interested in learning Thai, it's a great, easy, short podcast. It's not like a 3-hour diatribe, but like on the advanced concepts and stuff like that. It's a fun, easy listen, and it's easy to learn new stuff with her show. So cool. Definitely check it out. That's You Too Can Learn Thai, and cool. Thanks a lot, Nan, for coming on.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Nan, and I will check that out for sure.
Right on. All right, let's get into Love, Loathe, or Live With, where one of us picks a particular aspect of living in Bangkok, which we then discuss and decide if it's something we love about living here, loathe about living here, or have come to accept as just something that we have to learn to live with no matter how we feel about it. Last week, Ed asked me how I feel about ketchup on pizza, so this week I'm going to ask Ed a question.
Cool.
I got to say, I think we're going to lose half our listeners and probably several close friends because I came out last week and said I'm a live with on ketchup on pizza.
I can't believe, if you would not have surprised me with that, if you would have told me that ahead of time, I would have been like, okay, dude, let's do it different. We don't want people to know.
How do I? I don't want to embarrass me.
That's right. I didn't want to embarrass you, but it's out now.
To be clear, again, I don't put ketchup on pizza. But in the past, when I've had it, it ain't 100%
Okay,
bad.
don't repeat it. Don't repeat it.
I'm just digging myself a hole.
That's
all right.
Right.
Well, anyway, so Ed, you've had some birthdays here. I think you've had about 20 birthdays in Thailand.
That's right. That is correct.
About the same as me. So what's your take on when you go to a place and they sing happy birthday to you, the staff or your friends or whatever, and instead of going, happy birthday, dear Ed, they go, happy birthday, happy birthday. It's the depersonalization of the birthday song. What's your take?
Oh, dude, this is a great question. It's a very Thai thing. Now, I do notice that sometimes they do put the name in there, but I can't quite figure it out because at least back home, I remember the name always being in there. In other words, you don't decide to sing the song. You don't until you figure out what the person's name is. So it's a prerequisite, right?
I never heard the song without the name until I came to Thailand. That's
right. And now here it seems like majority is without the name. So I don't like it. I'm with you, man. It's depersonalizing. I think it's not just singing the song, but by putting the name in, you make it something special, right?
Yeah. It's like, hey, this is your day, man. We're here for you.
That's right. Happy birthday, dear, whatever your name is.
Yeah, like we've gone out of our way. Like if you're at a restaurant or something, we've gone out of the way to learn your name and personalize this experience for you.
Okay, let's put it in context, though. So what we're asking of Thai people is that they learn a foreign song and then sing it exactly the way we would like it to be sung. So maybe we should just give them credit for singing a happy birthday song in English.
Can you really call happy birthday foreign? I mean, it's
it is pretty universal, I guess. But
pretty
still,
universal.
Still, I don't know. That's a good question. I want to maybe that's a solid measure of Western cultural imperialism, is how many countries or how often in various countries do they sing the happy birthday song?
I think an even more interesting question would be: is there a Thai version of the happy? Like, is it like Sawati Wan Good? You know,
well, okay. I have only a small addition to this, which I'm curious what our listeners will think about this. So, way back in the day, this is probably 15 years ago. I was out of Bangkok and with a lot of people I didn't know, and this discussion of the Western happy birthday came up, and a Thai woman there said there is a traditional Thai happy birthday song, and she started to sing it, but the other Thai people were like, really? Like, I never heard that. But then one woman said, like, oh yeah, that's a very old song.
Okay.
So I'm under the impression, I've had it stuck in my head since that event, that there is actually a traditional Thai happy birthday song, but I don't know if it's that popular. You know,
interesting.
And it's not a copy of the Western. It's an organic, like, local Thai thing. So I don't know if our listeners. That's a good question for our listeners out there, our Thai listeners and our Thai language people, which who we know a lot of, right? Is there a traditional Thai happy birthday song? And if so, what is it? What are the lyrics?
Well, on this issue, I think I'm a begrudging live with, because I don't celebrate my birthday a lot, and I don't particularly like happy birthday being sung to me. But if I'm going to sit there and suffer through it, I would appreciate at least a little bit of personalization.
Right.
So,
I can't say, I probably would go live with, even though it's something that it does bug me, because it's not, okay, so this is not a case where I think you're asking too much, because Thai people are very capable of just asking someone what their name is. It's not like you're not asking them to pronounce some really difficult English word. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But
then again, I get it. I'm, when in Rome, I'm supposed to do as they do. But when you, in a way, it's like when you're overseas and then there's something, it's like Thai people may be eating at a Thai restaurant in the States, and they're like, I get it, I'm in the States, but if you're going to call this Thai food, please make real Thai food.
You were talking about this way too much, but I'm going to say maybe there's like another layer to it where Thais are sort of like shy, and they're, they don't want to use someone's nickname if they don't know them in a song. So they have to go with the full name. So they have to sing like happy birthday, dear Som Chawai Songsak with the Akun. And it just messes up the whole rhythm of the song. It's
a very good question. We'll ask our listeners, why do Thai people not often include the name? And then is there a traditional Thai happy birthday song? So I'm curious what our listeners and what our experts have to say.
All right, to live with.
Okay, so as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, we'd like to say thank you to Peter Kostovchik for lending us his support at the show shout-out level. Greg, what did you find out about Peter?
Well, I had a couple of very nice emails back and forth with our buddy Peter. He's a lot like you and me, Ed. He came here for a little while, turned into a long while. And he came in here, and actually he came in 2018, and he was doing software development on a short-term work assignment. I'm just going to be here for a little while.
I see.
We've heard that story before.
Right.
Turned into 2.5 years, and he finally got an offer to transfer permanently. And he said, yeah, he jumped at the offer. Boom, came to Thailand, COVID. He got COVIDed.
Damn.
He didn't get COVID. He, was caught up in the COVID situation.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Either way, yeah, right, yeah. So you think you finally, you're free,
yeah.
and then you're not free.
Welcome to Thailand. Stay inside for 2 years.
That's right. That's right.
But it's funny because he said, I said, is there anything interesting, that you want to say? And his story is actually the exact opposite with one of our previous guests, one of our previous patrons, S5.E23. Peter says, I always like to get spicy food when ordering. I love spicy food, and I mean spicy, even too spicy for most Thais.
Wow.
But anytime ordering and asking for pet mak mak results in, yeah, sure, look from the vendors, and I'll end up with farang spicy.
That's right.
Which is what I like. So he says, luckily, when I returned several times in the same place, his spiciness level is gradually increased over time to at least Thai spicy, which unfortunately still isn't enough for me.
Damn, stud.
Yeah. So I thought it'd be funny if he went out with S5.E23, because S5.E23 is one of our patrons who is Thai but does not like spicy food. So they should do a switcheroo. So like the Thai guy would be like crying, and the Farang guy would be like spicier. Yeah,
that's great. I like it.
Yeah,
I'm all for that.
It'll be good, like a good hidden camera show or something. There you go. $1 million idea, and I'll only take 5% off the top.
That's nice of you, man. All right. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Okay, final thanks to our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a ton of cool perks and the warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that they're supporting the show. Find out more by clicking support on our website. And connect with us online. We're Bangkok Podcast on social media, bangkokpodcast.com on the web, or simply bangkokpodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from our listeners and always reply to our messages.
Yeah, we do. You can also listen to each episode on YouTube, send us a voicemail online that will feature on the show, chat with us on Discord, or even reach out to me directly on Twitter where I am BKK Greg. So thanks for listening, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll see you back here next week.
Absolutely. Boom, boom, baby.
Boom, baby. Easy peasy Japanese. Now my son is going to start influencing the slang sayings that I say, which are in turn influenced by YouTube. So in effect, YouTube is influencing my linguistic hipness.
You're a child at heart.
Child mentally, some people would say. Most people, I'd say. All right.